management. There is a perception, I think, that middle management are part of the problem. There is a perception that middle management are the people that actually are really creating the blockers in order to try and create that inclusive culture. But when you talk to middle managers and you talk to them about actually what is it that's actually potentially preventing them from really trying to help and support diversity and inclusion, it's not the David Brents. I'm very pleased to say this is not representative of the Bank of England. This perhaps is slightly more, which is the people who haven't got enough time. Basically, when you talk about diversity and inclusion, sometimes it goes into that too difficult box, because actually it's something that people aren't thinking, they're not building it into their everyday practice. And I think that's what we are trying to move towards within the bank, is actually to say that this isn't something that you should think about as diversity or inclusion's going to walk through the door, and actually you need to put out that training manual about unconscious bias or whatever it is. You need to try and build it into everything you do every day. And that's partly what we're going to be talking about later. So what are we doing? So the first thing we did is we set up our framework. So we defined what we thought diversity was, what inclusion is. We have been very, very clear to our people that actually we want to build an inclusive culture. Diversity is a fact. Everybody's diverse. We all bring diversity. You can be a straight white guy. You are still diverse. When you look at, it depends on the measures that you're actually looking at when you're looking at trying to measure diversity. The key is, though, you can have as many diverse people in the organisation. If you don't have inclusion, you don't start leveraging that diversity in the organisation, you're not going to get the best out of your team. And this is the part where we need to try and really engage with managers, really explain why this is important, how they can try and build it in a way that doesn't mean that they're going to have an extra whole set of tasks that they've got to try and do. Now, how have we started to try and think about that? The first thing we've done is we've opened our HR books. Now, the bank, as I'm sure you probably would assume, is very, very data orientated. We love numbers. We love data analysis. We like to look at all the numbers. We like to look at more numbers and more numbers. So what have we done? Within HR, we've gone on a journey, and we're trying the best as we can to open our HR books, obviously within the respects of GDPR and all the data privacy, as far as we can, to try and make sure that people are aware of what's going on. What we've got up here are some examples of some reporting that we put into our annual report. So every year we have targets that we put in place around diversity representation. We have our senior management targets at the top. So actually in the last year, we actually took a little bit of a step back. However, when you start looking at our representation of below senior management, we're starting to see good levels of improvement towards having a better representation. And this is the piece where our our middle managers are absolutely key. Our senior management roles, these are not going to be within the gift of our middle managers in order to be able to try and influence. So what we've really tried to do is engage our middle managers and say, look, you're the ones who are going to be looking after our more junior people within the organisation. You're the ones who are going to be responsible for every part of that career path around recruitment, around retention, around development. And actually, we need your help if we're going to be able to try and achieve our targets over the next few years. So what we've done is we've started to produce quite forensic reports around recruitment, around retention and development, progression within the organisation, and around attrition rates within the organisation. And what we've done then is sit down and work with business areas and work with each individual business area and say, look, HR cannot sort this problem out. This is not something that HR, me as a diversity professional, is going to be able to come in and sit in every recruitment decision and say, do you know what, you're being biased here. I need your help. So we've had to try and work with the business and help them to try and create solutions that are going to be help them to address the issues within their respective business areas, but using that quite forensic approach. So within, this is our organisational wide stuff, but within each business area now, what we're doing is we're publishing retention rates, recruitment rates, hiring rates by grade within each business area, and sitting down with the middle management, not the senior managers, with the middle managers within the organisation and say, how can we do this? What's going wrong? Why have we got a higher BAME attrition rate within your particular part of the organisation? Why have we got a lower female hiring rate within this particular business area? But then we don't give them a blank piece of paper. What we've done is we've sat down with them and given them a menu of different opportunities and different activities that they can do in order to be able to address the particular issues that are there. And really, it's down to them to be able to then pick and choose what they think is going to be the most effective thing for their particular business area in order to try and drive change. That's not saying we're not doing stuff centrally, but what we all want to try and do is really empower managers to feel that actually they own this agenda. They can work within their respective business area to try and co-create what the solutions are in order to try and make sure that they can address the issues that are being raised. And as I said, we love the data, so we want to try and go a little bit further. So this year, what we've done is we've launched our cognitive diversity survey. Now, cognitive diversity, we really wanted to understand about diversity of thought within the organisation. What does it feel like if you're different within the organisation? What does it feel like if you're sat in a meeting and you are a Muslim? What does it feel like if you're sat in your or going and talking to a senior leader and you come from a different socioeconomic background? So we used 12 different measures of diversity and measured 7 different measures of inclusion to look at what it feels like for people within the whole organisation. And the results were absolutely fascinating. I could do a whole talk on that, so I'm not going to go into it now. But what it has done is given us a whole suite of additional data sets that we've been able to give to the business to try and understand and get under the skin about what it actually feels like to work within the organisation. Because when you start to think about hiring, some of the solutions there are pretty easy, or easier to think about, or easier to try and actually roll out. When you think about retention, and actually why are people leaving this organisation, it's much more difficult to get under the skin of why are people leaving here? What's the motivation for people leaving here? This has given them a data set that actually means that people can start to understand what it feels like to be different in the organisation and try and get under that and help. So data transparency is absolutely key. And this has led to our local inclusion plans. So basically, within each of the different respective deputy governorships within the organisation, we have an inclusion plan. So here's an example from the PRA. Our fantastic Sam Woods, a huge advocate for the diversity agenda across the organisation, who looks after the regulation of all the banks and insurance companies across the UK, is absolutely behind the plan that's here. We now have an a deputy governorship-wide plan, which is bespoke for the issues that are being raised by the PRA, and this has been developed by our local managers. Now, what's the impact of that? How are we seeing the changes that are coming through the organisation? Because the numbers actually have been relatively slow in being able to see progress. We are seeing progress, but we're seeing some change, but it's happening slowly. The exception would probably be our BAME agenda, where we've seen sort of 3 or 4% increase in our representation over the last 2 or 3 years. So what we're seeing, though, is in some areas where they're really trying to they're really engaging with this, and they're really starting to see the benefit of it. We're seeing things like our BAME attrition rate was probably about 2-3 years ago, was about 15%. It was huge. It was twice as high as our non-white, as our white population. By focusing on this, using the local plans, actually getting into the local business areas, which are really trying to do that, we've seen that attrition rate drop by half. How have we done that? What are the interventions? It's about those local people on the ground starting to have career conversations with people. We've seen the benefits of reciprocal mentoring for our BAME colleagues. We've seen buddying schemes being set up. But these are local initiatives that have really actually had an impact within those smaller local teams. And actually now we're starting to see the benefit of that feed through to the rest of the organisation. And I started at the beginning and thinking about actually where we were talking about our managers and actually trying to get our managers to think about diversity and inclusion in everything that we do. And this is something that we are absolutely passionate about. So when we are now looking at doing any form of change within HR, inclusion is part of that conversation. So we rolled out a whole new suite of management competencies that all of our managers are being assessed about. Inclusion is at the heart of it. Where we've looked at our training courses for new managers. We talk about inclusion, we talk about inclusive leadership, we talk about inclusive management, we talk about what that means for you. Our managers, when they're going out now to go and hire people within the organisation, they're going through inclusive training there. They're looking at the responses that they need to try and think about when they are meeting people who are different. We've introduced blind CVs for all of our applications for junior roles within the organisation. We have a whole suite of activities and initiatives where we are working with our employee network groups. We have 10 employee network groups within the organisation, faith-based as well as our identity-based. We're about to launch our 11th, which will be for veterans. They are a very, very active group that are helping the business and partnering with the business to try and address some issues. And by having this forensic approach with data, we can see that the businesses now are reaching out to those constituencies to try and understand what some of the issues are in that particular space. We run a whole suite of activities during the course of the year. Earlier in April, we had our Inclusion Week within the bank, where we had a load of different forms of training that were being rolled out, awareness raising. I'm sure most of the organisations around the room here have very, very similar things in place. But I think the key for me is the fact there is no silver bullet here. There is nothing that you can do. There's no one thing that you're going to be able to pick off the shelf and actually be able to solve all of your diversity and inclusion problems. This is about trying to work with people who understand what the problems are within the local business areas, working with them, talking to them, and trying to co-create ideas about how you can try and address them. It's not an HR thing. This has to be led and driven by the business. So that's it from me. I thank you very, very much for your time this morning, and I look forward to hearing your questions later. Thank you.